What lies ahead is not a fall, but an awakening to that which should never have been forgotten. For too long, the heavens have guarded their secrets. But today that truth shatters. The hour has come. What remains of us? Only the memory of our deeds. Every rebellion begins with a question. In the celestial council, angels raised their voices, but not in praise. This time, the air hung heavy with a novel weight. A particular being observed it all from the shadows. Eyes unwavering, their heart throbbing with an unfamiliar power. That being, once among the most radiant, no longer shone with the same brilliance. Azazel, leader of the Watchers, had begun to doubt. In the early days of creation, he had been a glorious angel, wings gleaming like the sunrise, destined to watch over the earth and teach humankind. Azazel had seen humans, fragile beings, yet brimming with a dangerous curiosity. The Almighty God had granted them freedom, and that stirred something within his breast, a silent rebellion. He was not alone. His followers, those known as the Watchers, shared his unease. They were angels with a different view of the world, who saw humanity as more than mere clay creatures. They believed humans possessed potential, something worthy of cultivation, not simply observation from high above, in the depths of heaven. Azazel gathered his closest confidants. The conversation that followed would seal their doom, though they were yet unaware. "The Creator has given us a mandate," said Semihaza, his friend and brother in cause, his voice grave. "We must teach them, yes, but not interfere. We must not allow the fire of human ambition to consume them." Azazel gazed toward the edge of the Grand Council, where the divine voice resided, seemingly oblivious to the growing unrest among the Watchers. Its vacant stare was a sign that heaven had ceased to be a place of dialogue, of change. Azazel could bear it no longer. The silence, the obedience, the eternity. Was that all there was? What if humans were destined for something greater? What if we were entrusted to guide them, not merely watch over them? Azazel spoke in a low voice, as if fearing the heavens themselves might overhear. Semihaza watched him falter before whispering. "Speaking of this could be a sin, Azazel." "Yes," he replied, "but no more than remaining silent when one sees the truth." His tone hardened. "It is time to act. It is time to teach them, to guide them to their true purpose. We can wait no longer." The light of heaven began to tremble, as if the universe itself were aware of the decision being made. The council of angels had been clear. They were not to intervene. But the desire of Azazel and his followers grew. As the weeks passed, their dissent intensified. They had been sent to observe and protect, but heaven had forbidden them from doing anything more. Azazel couldn't understand how they could remain blind to creation, to these diminutive beings, yet brimming with potential, with doubts, with desires. One night, as the light of heaven descended upon the earth, Azazel made a decision. He approached his followers, his closest confidants, those who shared his vision. "We shall descend to earth," Azazel declared, and the words echoed like thunder in the hearts of the assembled angels. "We will teach humanity. We will give them what they need: wisdom, strength, knowledge." "We cannot do that," murmured another of the angels, one who had remained silent until now. "The forbidden, the punishment. We accept it," Azazel interrupted, looking around. "There is no turning back. This is our destiny." The angel's wings vibrated, and the entire sky seemed to shrink under the weight of his words. It was the beginning of something greater than themselves, something that would change the history of all worlds. The rending of the heavens. The decision was made, but uncertainty continued to weigh on Azazel like a shadow he couldn't dispel. As the first star began to gleam on the horizon, Azazel's angelic followers began their preparations, not with the brilliance of purity that defined them, but with a somber determination that invaded their hearts. They were about to cross the line, to defy the mandate of heaven, and the weight of that act would transform them forever. The celestial court, oblivious to the rebellion brewing within its ranks, continued its daily routine, blessing and observing humanity from afar. The angels couldn't comprehend the dilemmas Azazel felt. For them, fulfilling the divine will was the sole reason for existence. But to him, the blindness of his brethren was unbearable. He saw them as guardians, as protectors, but also as beings with the potential to become something more. Why not see what they are capable of? Azazel mused as he watched the radiance of the sky. We are their guides, and if we must teach them to walk, then we must walk with them. The wings of the rebel angels beat softly in the air, like a subtle melody, but laden with promises of change. They had chosen Earth, a place where the stars couldn't see them so clearly. Here, in this world of shadows and light, their presence would go unnoticed. A week later, they descended. The fall was not the kind that would later be chronicled, with flames and cataclysms, but a quiet descent, as if the universe itself had decided to step aside for a moment to allow them passage. The angels, their garments resplendent, but tarnished by the decision they had made, landed on what would later be known as the mountains of Ararat. The earth watched them with curious, but unafraid, eyes. They, too, were part of creation, but did not yet comprehend all that surrounded them. Azazel led the group with a firm stride, his gaze fixed on the horizon, where humanity struggled to survive, to understand the world that had been given to them. Each of the rebel angels was trapped in their own thoughts. Some felt the weight of sin, others the glory of the mission they were about to undertake. We are the angels who will teach, Azazel said in a low but firm voice, as if the words were a declaration of war against heaven itself. The Creator has given us this destiny, and we will not be mere observers. We will help them rise. Semihaza, his closest ally, looked at him with a mixture of emotion and doubt. What will happen when we are discovered? We cannot return to heaven. We will never be able to return to what we were. Azazel looked at him for a moment. Then his eyes turned toward the horizon, where human civilization was beginning to form its first villages. There is no return. We know, but we must teach them. Each step we take here will change the course of everything. As they advanced toward the land of men, the weight of the planet's gravity felt alien to them. For the first time in their existences, they felt the weight of the physical. Despite their celestial nature, their feet touched the earth, and with each step, they felt something inside them begin to break. It was in the first villages that they began to teach. They were not gods, that was not the point. They were teachers. In secret, they transmitted forgotten knowledge to humans. Metallurgy, astrology, the arts of agriculture and medicine. They gave them what humans could not understand on their own. But in every action, every lesson, something began to be distorted. Humans began to rise up, to understand the power the angels were bestowing upon them, and the relationship between teacher and student became distorted. Some began to see the angels as more powerful beings, almost divine. One of the most fervent followers of Azazel, an angel named Arakiel, was the first to suggest that humans worship the Watchers. Why not recognize the true nature of their master? He told them in a low voice, but with a tone of authority. We have come to guide you, to make you strong. We are not mere mortals, and you should not see us as such. Azazel was reluctant at first. We have not come to be worshipped, but to teach, he replied. But something in Arakiel's face made him hesitate. There was something in his followers' eyes, a kind of thirst for power that grew with each lesson imparted. The wind of the earth, so different from the peace of heaven, began to influence them in a way they could not foresee. And it was the moment Azazel heard humans murmur new names for them, like the fallen gods, that he understood the irreversibility of their act. The light of the heavens was being withdrawn from them little by little. The connection with their celestial home was no longer the same, but the worst was yet to come. One night, as the angels gathered in silence, Azazel looked at his followers and said in a grave voice, "There is no turning back now. Heaven has abandoned us. Our fate is sealed. We will not be forgiven." But it was at that moment that Semihaza, the angel who had been his confidant and companion, approached and whispered, "What if, instead of being forgiven, we reveal ourselves completely, if the fall is our liberation?" The proposition was like a lightning bolt, illuminating a dark corner of Azazel's heart. There was a possibility he had never considered. Not only defy heaven, but become something more, something superior, something that would dominate the destiny of all creation. The rebellion was no longer just about teaching humans. It was a cry for independence, for freedom from the dominion of heaven. The fallen angels didn't just want to redirect history. They wanted to rewrite it. Azazel looked at his followers, now profoundly changed. The decision to cross the line between heaven and earth was no longer just an act of teaching, but a defiance of nature itself. If the fall is what awaits us, Azazel finally said, with a new gleam in his eyes, then let the fall be the first step toward our true freedom. Chapter 2. The Shadow of Knowledge. Earth was a place that now vibrated with an unknown energy, as if every breath of its inhabitants was accompanied by the presence of something ancient and powerful. The fallen angels, in their eagerness to enlighten men, began to realize that their actions were not only transforming them, but also the very fabric of creation. Men, who before barely understood the scope of their existence, now found themselves touched by the forbidden knowledge that the Watchers had bestowed upon them. And knowledge, as always, was not only light, but also darkness. Azazel watched in silence from the hills near the villages where his influence had already been sown. Men no longer only cultivated the land. Now they forged metals, observed the heavens with a gaze of admiration and fear, and built new weapons with the same impetus with which they sowed their fields. Something had changed in them, something essential that separated them from the men who were once simple and without conscience. The power that the Watchers had granted them had awakened ambition in them. Perhaps we have gone too far, Azazel murmured one afternoon as he watched from afar the gleam of the villages on the horizon. In the hands of humans, the wisdom the angels had bestowed upon them seemed to come at a price, the awakening of a dangerous unrest. Knowledge has caused them to rise, but also to face their own nature. Semihaza, always at Azazel's side, seemed uneasy, but the light in his eyes still shone with a mixture of pride and fear. You don't understand, Azazel. This is what we had dreamed of. They have the potential. We are giving them what the Creator never allowed them, what He allowed us. Finally, we have become masters of men. We have unleashed something within them and made them more powerful. Azazel replied with a somber expression. Too powerful. This is not just knowledge, Semihaza. It is a fire that can be extinguished or consume everything. But the seed was already planted. Humans, like the angels, began to understand that their existence was no longer the same. As civilization grew, so did the despair of men. How could they control something so big? The hunger for more wisdom became an obsession. It was not just learning, it was transcending. And the fallen angels, those who had allowed it, began to understand that perhaps they should not have intervened. The first sign that the relationship between men and the fallen angels was becoming dangerous came in the form of a man named Lamech. Lamech was not a leader or a king. He was simply a man who had learned too quickly. He had been one of the first to receive the secrets of metallurgy, and had begun to forge swords and armor that surpassed anything men had ever known. His work was so grand that many began to call him the man who equaled the gods. One afternoon, as Azazel and Semihaza were walking through a nearby forest, they were intercepted by a small group of humans who already knew them. Among them, Lamech was at the front, his gaze burning with defiance. "Watchers," Lamech said, his voice laden with admiration and arrogance. "You have given us everything, haven't you? Knowledge, wisdom. Now tell me, what more can we achieve? Do you also fear us now? Because we are already like you or more." Lamech's words struck Azazel like a hammer. The man, with his arrogance born of the secrets the angels had bestowed upon him, seemed to not understand the weight of what he was saying. Azazel looked at him fixedly, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of awe and concern. "We have not come to make gods of you," Azazel said. "We have come to teach you, not to be replaced by you." But Lamech, with his defiant gaze, replied, "Haven't we learned everything we need? You have given us not only wisdom, but power. And power, as you know, cannot be stopped." Semihaza took a step forward, placing a hand on Azazel's shoulder. "You are right, Lamech," he said calmly. "The power that has been given to you has no limits, but remember, all power carries responsibility. Not everything you know is meant to be used." Lamech laughed. "Responsibility? That is what you wanted us to believe, right? But I see the truth. Power has been given to us, and if we men can be like you, why shouldn't we be more than you?" At that moment, the silence became heavy. Azazel felt a pang of pain in his chest. Humans had crossed an invisible line, and although his intention had always been to help them grow, he now saw them facing a much greater danger. Their own arrogance, their belief that they could equal the angels. Something inside Azazel began to break, as if the fall at the end was inevitable. "Leave, Lamech," Azazel said, without the compassion he had shown before. "Leave before we all pay the price for your words." But Lamech defied him. "You are no longer our masters," he said with a twisted smile. "Now we are the masters of our destiny." As Lamech walked away, leaving behind the angels and his group, the atmosphere that had accompanied the fall of the angels felt denser. Azazel, for the first time, doubted the mission he had begun. The power of men had reached a terrifying speed, and with it, their desire for control. "What have we done, Semihaza?" Azazel whispered as he watched the men who, far from being humble before their new power, rose higher in their pride. "They are no longer what we thought. We have realized what it means to teach them too much. We are not guiding them. We are opening an abyss for them." Semihaza, who had been silent for a long time, finally spoke in a bitter voice. "We cannot stop them now. The seed that we planted has borne fruit. If someone can fall lower, it will be them, and we will pay the price." Azazel said with a firmness that resonated in the air. The fall has begun. Chapter 3: The Rise and Fall. The shadow of knowledge had fallen upon humanity, and there was no way to undo it. Men, blinded by the power that the Watchers had bestowed upon them, began to expand their dominion beyond the limits that Azazel and his followers had foreseen. In the villages, the metallurgy workshops were transformed into weapon factories. The villages, once humble and isolated, grew into cities, rising like towers toward the sky, and in their foundations no longer resided humility, but the insatiable desire for power. The first confrontation occurred when humans, armed with swords and axes forged with the knowledge that the Watchers had provided, decided to invade a neighboring village. Lamech, the man who had proclaimed himself equal to the gods, was not only a leader of men, but a general. The ambition that his master, Azazel, had feared had materialized in his heart, and now he commanded armies of men with powerful weapons that overwhelmed any attempt at resistance. Azazel, who had been watching in silence from the hills, felt the tide of the inevitable. The fall not only affected them, the fallen angels, but the men had not only acquired knowledge, but now they were using it to unleash war, destruction, as if they were masters of everything around them. And in their thirst for power, they seemed to have forgotten that above all, the laws of creation still existed, laws that could not be broken without paying a price. One afternoon, as clouds gathered on the horizon, Semihaza found Azazel beside a small stream. The air was charged with electricity, and the water of the stream gleamed as if reflecting an invisible light. "What is happening, Azazel?" Semihaza asked, approaching with an expression of concern. "This is not what we planned. Lamech has unleashed war. Men fight each other and we cannot control them." Azazel did not respond immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the water, as if he were searching for something in its reflection. Finally, he spoke with a calmness that did not match the storm raging within him. "We will not control it, Semihaza. This is not about control. They have crossed the threshold. Don't you see it? What we gave them was too much. The seed of ambition has germinated. It is not just power that they seek. It is dominion. It is to be greater than everything around them." Semihaza looked at the sky and sighed. "We thought they could be more. We thought that by giving them knowledge, we were offering them a path to greatness." "No, Semihaza," Azazel replied with a deep sigh. We gave them the opportunity to choose, but we did not give them the wisdom to know how to use it. Pride has replaced humility, and that is not something we can fix. Suddenly, a distant crash resounded in the distance, like thunder that did not belong to the sky. Azazel and Semihaza rose instantly, and the wings of both spread, defying gravity as they flew toward the origin of the sound. The scene that awaited them was not a battle between humans, but a demonstration of the cruelty that power had sown in their hearts. Lamech, now surrounded by his devoted followers, had invaded one of the nearby villages, and he hadn't just won. He had razed everything in his path, leaving nothing but devastation and despair. In the center of the ravaged village, a grotesque, towering statue of a humanoid god stood defiantly, formed from the mangled remains of the fallen villagers. A macabre monument to Lamech's twisted ambition, it loomed over a gruesome pile of corpses, a stark testament to his brutality. The statue itself was a perversion, the face of the mech twisted into a monstrous visage of a war god. Azazel and Semihaza halted at a safe distance, their faces etched with horror as they observed the ghastly spectacle. The air was thick with the stench of death and the acrid smoke of burning homes. "This is not what we had imagined," Semihaza murmured, his face pale with the magnitude of the chaos that had now been unleashed. The weight of their actions pressed heavily on him. "This is not the path to greatness. It is a descent into madness." Azazel clenched his teeth, his eyes burning with a mixture of anger and frustration. "What did we expect, Semihaza? There is no greatness without sacrifice, and they have taken that truth and twisted it to their own depraved ends. Lamech believes himself to be a god, and the worst part is that he has the power to make it so. He has the power and the will." Semihaza turned to Azazel, his expression filled with worry and a growing sense of dread. "What will we do now, Azazel? How can we stop this madness?" Azazel remained silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the flames of war were beginning to spread, consuming everything in their path. He saw the darkness rising, the shadow of despair creeping across the land. Finally, his words were low, heavy with condemnation. "What we must do now is ensure that this plague does not spread further. Lamech and his followers must be stopped. If we do not act, if we allow this power to expand unchecked, humanity will fall into the deepest darkness, a darkness from which they may never return." It was then that the next unexpected twist occurred, a twist that would forever alter the course of their destiny. A being, one that Azazel had not anticipated, appeared in the midst of the chaos. Enoch, the descendant of Adam, known among men for his wisdom and his profound visions, had walked with the angels before the rebellion and had been one of the few humans to receive knowledge that transcended human comprehension. The moment Azazel saw him, he knew that things had not only become complicated, they had become irrevocably changed. The arrival of Enoch meant that the fate of men and the fallen angels no longer depended solely on their decisions. Something much larger, something far more significant, was at stake. "Azazel," Enoch said, his eyes glowing with an inner light, a light that seemed to pierce through the darkness and reveal the hidden truths. "I know what you have done, and I know what you have unleashed upon this world." Azazel frowned, his brow furrowed in defiance. "I have done nothing that was not part of destiny, Enoch. Humanity needed to awaken from its slumber. They were meant for more than ignorance. Awakening should not come at the cost of such suffering," Enoch replied, his voice filled with sorrow. "You have given men knowledge, but you have also given them death. They are not chosen to walk the same path as the angels, and now they must pay the price for your transgression." A chill ran down Azazel's spine. Enoch's words were a stark reminder of what he had forgotten, of the delicate balance he had disrupted. The power of the fallen angels was limited, and their fall had not only affected them but the entire equilibrium of creation. Now, humanity stood on the precipice of a war that threatened not only men but everything that existed. Chapter 4. The Wrath of Heaven. The air, thick with accumulated tension, seemed to vibrate with a dark energy, a palpable sense of impending doom. The war between men, fueled by the power of the Watchers, was spreading rapidly. Villages fell under the dominion of the Mech and his army, while other humans began to rise, imitating him and forming new factions, each vying for dominance. It was no longer just a struggle for power. It was a relentless fight for supremacy, a desperate grab for control of the divine spark that had been ignited within them. Amidst this chaos, the fallen angels, acutely aware of what they had unleashed, prepared to make a final, fateful decision. Enoch had arrived at the devastated village, where Azazel and Semihaza stood, their souls weighed down by the guilt of what men had become. The weight of their actions was a crushing burden. Enoch, though mortal, possessed an ancient knowledge that no other human had ever touched. He had spoken with the angels in the past, and his eyes, now burdened with the wisdom of generations, did not look upon Azazel with contempt but with profound sadness and a deep understanding of the tragedy that had unfolded. "What you have done, Azazel, cannot be undone," Enoch said, his voice resonating with a somber tone. "You cannot stop the tide of what you have unleashed. The knowledge you have given to men is not just a gift. It is a curse, a burden they are not equipped to bear." Azazel stared at him, his expression as severe as the stormy sky that was gathering above them, a mirror of the turmoil within. "We know what we have done. What did you expect? Did you expect us to remain in the heavens, idly observing without intervening? Men have the right to know, to learn. Don't you see what they can become?" Enoch shook his head slowly, his gaze filled with a mixture of pity and regret. "What men must learn is not what you have taught them. You have given them too much power, too soon. They were not prepared. You have overflowed the chalice of creation. And now, Azazel, we must all pay the price." As Enoch's words hung in the air, something else stirred in the shadows, a growing sense of foreboding. It was not just the weight of guilt that tormented the fallen angels, but the imminent threat of a much greater punishment, one that was already about to descend upon them. The sky, which until now had remained silent, finally made its wrath known. A blinding flash tore through the stillness of the afternoon, and from the heavens descended an army of angels whose wings did not shimmer like those of the fallen but shone with a cold, almost deadly light. They carried swords of fire, and their eyes reflected the implacable authority of the heavens. "Azazel," the voice of an angel boomed through the air, grave and full of authority, a voice that once held warmth and brotherhood, but now echoed with condemnation. "You have disobeyed the celestial decree. You have corrupted creation itself. The judgment of God is at hand. You will be judged, and you and all your followers will fall." Azazel felt a chill course through his body, a cold dread that settled deep in his bones. The presence of these angels, who once had been his brothers, enveloped him with a sense of doom that he could not escape. The heavens had come to reclaim what was theirs, and there was no place left for them to hide. "I know," Azazel murmured, his voice low but firm, a whisper of defiance in the face of divine judgment. The resignation was evident, yet his resolve remained unbroken. Semihaza, standing beside him, could not help but stare at the descending angels, now surrounding them like a cage of righteous fire. "What are we going to do?" he asked, his voice trembling with fear. "They will not let us live. They will destroy us all." "Not if we fight," Azazel said with a resolution he had not shown before, his eyes blazing with a fierce light. "If we must fall, we will fall with dignity. We will not be their flock. We will not be their slaves." With a ferocious cry, Azazel raised his hands toward the heavens, and the wings of the fallen angels began to glow with a crimson radiance, a dark brilliance that was not of the light of heaven but of their own rebellion. The air crackled with electricity as the fallen angels prepared for battle, their hearts filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. In that instant, the judgment of the heavens and the rebellion of the fallen collided with the violence of a thunderclap. But the combat was not only physical. It was a battle for souls, for the right to exist outside the imposed laws of the celestial realm. The fallen angels, now marked by their own rebellion, fought with the fury of those who had defied the divine order. The angels of heaven, sent by the will of the Most High, fought to eradicate what they considered a corruption that must be purged from the face of creation. The air filled with screams and the clash of fiery swords as heaven and earth confronted each other in a combat that would mark the destiny of both worlds. The stakes were higher than ever, and the consequences of their actions would reverberate throughout eternity. The fighting was intense, but the most terrifying aspect was not the physical combat but the division that had been sown among the angels themselves. Those who once shared the same glory and the same purpose were now divided by loyalty to a heaven that had ceased to be their home. "We fight for freedom, not for destruction," Azazel shouted as he faced the celestial angels, his voice echoing across the battlefield. "We seek the right to choose our own destiny." One of the angels of heaven, his face radiant with wrath, responded, "The freedom you desire is only chaos. Heaven cannot be corrupted by your rebellion. There is no path to redemption for those who have defied the divine will." Azazel, while fighting with skill and ferocity, looked around him, observing the chaos that he had unleashed. Each blow he struck felt as though he were tearing a little more of the fabric of creation itself, unraveling the very essence of existence. There was no turning back. The lines had been drawn, and the battle for their survival had begun. The humans, witnessing the battle unleashed between beings they considered gods, began to fear what they had invoked. In their hearts, doubt began to blossom. Had they truly desired this? Was what they had achieved destined to destroy them? The realization that their ambition had led to such devastation was a heavy burden to bear. In that instant, a cry resonated from the horizon, a sound of despair and regret. Azazel turned toward the origin of the sound and saw Lamech, the very man who had spearheaded the war in the name of his power, his face now showing an expression of utter horror. The war of the gods had spiraled beyond human control. The seed that he himself had sown was turning against him, threatening to consume everything in its path. "What have we done?" Lamech cried, his words filled with desperation. The weight of his responsibility was a crushing burden. "We have become what we feared most. The gods have come to destroy us all." In the heart of the battle, Azazel, seeing the chaos unfolding before him, understood that the true war was not just against the celestial angels but against himself. The knowledge that he had granted to men, his rebellion against the celestial order, everything was collapsing now upon them, crushing them beneath its weight. "All of this cannot be stopped," he murmured with a bitter resignation, his voice barely audible above the din of battle. "Creation itself is breaking apart." Semihaza, standing beside him, looked at him with sadness, his eyes reflecting the desolation of their surroundings. "The fall is inevitable, Azazel, but perhaps there is something beyond destruction. Perhaps there is hope even in the face of such devastation." Azazel nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Yes, but that no longer depends on us. The fate of humanity is now in their hands, not ours." Chapter 5: The Final Judgment. The sky was no longer the place it once had been, a realm of peace and serenity. The clouds that loomed over the earth did not only announce storms but the ominous presence of divine wrath, a tangible manifestation of the heavens' displeasure. The winds of creation were beginning to shake the very fabric of reality, and the nature of the universe seemed to crumble under the weight of the decisions that had been made, the choices that had led them to this cataclysmic moment. Azazel, watching the battle that still raged, felt the condemnation drawing near, the tightening noose of divine judgment closing in around them. The war with the celestial angels had taken an irreversible turn. The flames of divine justice had begun to consume the fallen angels, burning away every trace of what they once were, leaving nothing but ashes and regret. The punishment was no longer just a celestial act. It was a judgment upon existence itself, the end of all that they had been, a final and irrevocable decree. Semihaza approached, his face marked by pain and resignation, the lines of sorrow etched deep into his features. "Do you think there is any hope, Azazel? Any way to prevent all of this from disintegrating? The heavens will not leave us in peace. They will destroy us." Azazel raised his gaze, his eyes reflecting the light of the battle, a faint flicker of defiance remaining in the face of overwhelming odds. I do not know, Semihaza, but I cannot regret what I did. Men needed us. They could not continue to be mere creatures without consciousness, without knowledge. Whatever happens now, they are the future, not us. Semihaza looked toward the battlefields, where the blood of the fallen, both human and angel, mingled with the earth, staining the ground with the evidence of their transgressions. And if the future that we have given them destroys them, is that not our fault? We thought we had given them freedom, but what we have really done is unleash them into chaos. The weight of their actions pressed down on him, a heavy burden of guilt and regret. Azazel did not respond immediately. There was something more in Semihaza's words, something that had been tormenting him since he descended to earth, a nagging doubt that haunted his every thought. The future of men no longer depended on the fallen angels. Men, armed with an immeasurable and uncontrolled power, were no longer the simple human beings of old but creatures of ambition and chaos, driven by an insatiable hunger for more. The rebellion had liberated something much darker than he had imagined, a primal force that threatened to consume them all. At that moment, the presence of heaven made itself felt once more. A resplendent being, the highest of all the angels, descended into the midst of the chaos. His aura radiated a light so pure that even the air seemed to burn with its proximity. It was Michael, the archangel of justice, the leader of the celestial hosts, the embodiment of divine authority. The light of his sword of fire shone with a blinding intensity, a beacon of righteousness in the midst of darkness. Azazel. His voice thundered like the heavens themselves, a voice that commanded obedience and instilled awe. The moment has arrived. Heaven has decided the fate of those who have rebelled. Your fall is irrevocable, and there is no way to redeem what you have unleashed. The time for judgment has come. Azazel stepped forward, his gaze unwavering, his spirit unbowed. I am not the only one to blame. You also abandoned us. Where was heaven when men needed guidance? We helped them to rise because their own creator forgot them. Michael looked at him with a mixture of fury and sadness, his expression reflecting the conflict within him. Heaven never forgot them, Azazel. The knowledge that you offered to men was not meant for them. You, the fallen, sought power for yourselves, and punishment will be the consequence of your arrogance. Punishment? Azazel retorted, his voice full of bitterness. Do you think that will solve anything? What we have done cannot be erased, and men, no matter how much you try to destroy them, will continue forward, in their ignorance or in their power, because they are creation as much as we are. They are part of the fabric of existence, and their fate is intertwined with our own. At that moment, a great silence fell upon the battlefield. The angels, fallen, exhausted, and wounded, could no longer resist. The humans, confused and afraid, watched, not knowing whether they were responsible for what was happening or mere pawns in a war beyond their comprehension. But before Michael could make the final move, Enoch appeared on the scene. His figure, less resplendent than that of the angels but equally full of wisdom, walked slowly between the battle, his gaze fixed on Azazel, his presence a beacon of hope in the midst of despair. Time seemed to stop as the two looked at each other, their fates intertwined in this pivotal moment. Enoch, Azazel whispered, almost as if he could not believe what he saw, his voice filled with wonder and disbelief. What are you doing here? Enoch moved toward him, his steps resonating on the ground as if each of them were a sentence, a pronouncement of destiny. I have come to stop what cannot be stopped, he said, his voice calm but full of authority, a voice that commanded respect and demanded attention. I cannot change what you have done, Azazel, but I can offer you one last opportunity, a chance for redemption. Azazel looked at him, confused, his brow furrowed in bewilderment. An opportunity? What kind of opportunity? Enoch paused, as if weighing his own words, contemplating the gravity of what he was about to propose. Heaven has decided your judgment, but I offer you something more. A sacrifice that could save men, even if it costs you everything that you are. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air, a choice between destruction and redemption. Michael, seeing the confrontation, raised his sword, his expression filled with anger and disapproval. "Enough, Enoch. You cannot save him. He has already crossed the threshold. There is no turning back." But Enoch, unmoved, raised his hand, his eyes fixed on Azazel. "It is not about saving Azazel, but about saving men. If heaven destroys him, the balance will be lost. Men will fall into darkness, and then we will all be responsible for their fate. The future of creation hangs in the balance." Enoch looked directly at Azazel, and for a moment, Azazel saw something more in his eyes, something that he had not seen before, the possibility of redemption, a glimmer of hope in the midst of devastation, a chance to atone for his transgressions. "I offer you this opportunity," Enoch said, his voice resonating with sincerity and compassion. "If you are willing to pay the price, if you and your fallen brothers are willing to give everything to save humanity, there may yet be hope." Azazel stared at him, the weight of decisions upon him, a crossroads of destiny. He knew what it implied. He knew that once the decision was made, there would be no turning back. He was at a precipice, a moment of ultimate reckoning. At that moment, a final roar of war surged from the corners of the earth, a sound of desperation and defiance. And Azazel, looking at the men he had once wanted to save, understood something fundamental. The power that he had granted could not be undone. But perhaps destruction was not the only answer. Perhaps sacrifice was the only way to restore the balance. "I am ready," he said finally, his voice trembling but determined, his spirit unbowed in the face of his impending doom. "If I must lose myself to save them all, I will do it. For the sake of humanity, I will embrace my fate." The sacrifice of Azazel and the fallen angels was an act of redemption but also of condemnation. Like a lightning bolt in the storm, their light was extinguished, and with it the power of the watchers over men. The judgment of the heavens was fulfilled, but the price was high. The men, now free from the direct influence of the angels, had to forge their own destiny without the gods who had guided them. But the world was no longer the same. It had been touched by rebellion, and the shadow of Azazel, of the fallen, of what was lost, would always endure. The memory of their actions would forever haunt the hearts of men. As the days passed, humanity was transformed. In their quest to achieve forbidden knowledge, men took a step toward something that they never would have imagined: absolute power. The fallen angels, at first simple observers, became teachers and guides, and in doing so, they brought with them both the promise of greatness and the seed of self-destruction, the potential for both creation and annihilation. The first moments, filled with light and hope, were only the prelude to an inevitable fall. Azazel and the others, moved by an impulse of compassion for humanity, gave in to the arrogance of believing that they could alter the natural course of things. The wisdom that they shared with men was not a gift without consequences but a weight that humans were not prepared to bear, as if ignorance had protected them from the burden of knowledge. Knowledge brought with it not only the understanding of the stars and metal but also the ability to destroy and covet beyond what was possible, a thirst for power that threatened to consume them all. The fallen angels, in their eagerness to illuminate humanity, did not anticipate that men would not only learn from their teachings but seek to surpass their own creators, to transcend their mortal limitations. The power that the fallen delivered was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it opened doors to profound knowledge, but on the other, it sowed in human hearts an insatiable thirst, a need to control and dominate. It was no longer a simple awakening but an uncontrolled impulse to transcend, to be more, to challenge even the gods themselves. The story of the fallen angels is not only the story of a rebellion but of a dream truncated by human nature itself, the inability to handle absolute power without succumbing to corruption. Knowledge, when granted without wisdom, becomes a burden, not a blessing. And in this case, what was offered to men was too great, too vast to comprehend without destroying themselves in the process. Azazel, who at first believed in the goodness of his mission, began to see the truth in the eyes of men. The power that they granted had not made them better. It had only distanced them from their original nature, and in that path, it had made them more vulnerable, more susceptible to corruption. The freedom that they thought they offered them became a chain, one that humans imposed on themselves when they believed that knowledge granted them the right to everything, even to challenge the very order of creation. The price of knowledge, as high as it was not paid only by the fallen angels but also by men, who in their ambition and their desire to imitate their creators forgot the most basic thing, that power without limits inevitably leads to destruction. And while the fallen angels, trapped in their own rebellion, desperately tried to find a path of redemption, men, now orphans of celestial guidance, faced the same struggle. How to manage what they had been given. How to avoid falling into the same mistakes as those who brought them the knowledge. The weight of their choices was a heavy burden to bear, and the future of humanity hung in the balance. The final sacrifice of Azazel was not only that of his soul but that of a broken promise, the promise of a future in which men could be something more than what they were, but at the cost of all that they had known and lost. And in that loss, in that surrender, there was something of redemption. Perhaps not for the fallen, not even for men, but for creation itself, which by being touched by knowledge had been transformed, irrevocably changed. Forevermore. In the end, what remains is the awareness of what knowledge truly signifies. It's not merely a gift or absolute power, but a profound responsibility that can overwhelm even the wisest among us. The fallen angels, in their attempt to enlighten humanity, did so in a way that ultimately led only to darkness. Humankind, in turn, must now decide whether they are capable of learning from their own errors or whether, like their celestial predecessors, they will be lost in the abyss of their own ambition. The tale of the fallen angels is a story of an eternal cycle, one that repeats itself time and again. The struggle between knowledge and wisdom, between power and humility. And as humanity continues on its path, perhaps the most crucial lesson is that no matter how far they reach, the price of what they desire will always be higher than they expect. Knowledge, that flame that began as a brilliant spark in the hearts of the fallen angels, had transformed the world in ways that even they hadn't foreseen. At first, it seemed that humans, finally freed from the darkness of ignorance, could build something new, something better. But swiftly, the seed of arrogance began to germinate within them, taking shape in desires for power, control, and expansion. Humans, by their very nature, had proven incapable of handling the gift bestowed upon them by the angels. Instead of using knowledge for prosperity and peace, they began to forge weapons, to build empires, to challenge the natural order, all in the name of a distorted vision of what it meant to be greater than creation itself. The Watchers, who had once guided humanity in its ascent, now observed with horror as the humans, for whom they had sacrificed so much, delved into the path of self-destruction. They had sown the seeds of ambition, and now they reaped the whirlwind of its consequences. A dark wind swept across the land, carrying the scent of burning fields and broken promises. The question persisted in the hearts of the fallen. Had they done the right thing? Had they done what they should have done? Azazel, as he observed the unleashed war among humans and the consequences of his own intervention, began to doubt. He had believed that freedom and knowledge should be imparted to humans without reservation, without restrictions, but the price that was being paid for that knowledge was far too high. And worst of all, the humans, now with power in their hands, were beginning to lose their humanity. Their faces, once filled with wonder and curiosity, were now etched with greed and malice. The light in their eyes, once a reflection of the divine spark, had been extinguished, replaced by the cold, calculating glint of ambition. The conflict between the celestial angels and the fallen reflected an even greater battle, the struggle for the very soul of humanity. The angels of heaven, who had never ceased to follow the divine laws, watched with horror what their fallen brethren had provoked. Heaven, with its unyielding order, failed to understand that the very order they defended had been what had kept humanity locked in ignorance. The celestial choirs, once harmonious and unified, were now fractured by discord, their celestial harmonies replaced by the mournful dirge of regret. Was that the right thing? Did humans deserve to be treated as inferior beings, without the right to know the truth? But when knowledge reached them, something changed. Humans began to doubt their own fragility, and that doubt transformed into the desire to transcend. They wanted not only to understand the universe but to control it. The whisper of divinity, once a distant echo, now reverberated within their souls, fueling their insatiable thirst for power. They felt like gods, but at the same time, they were being dragged down by their own fears and desires. Power, instead of elevating them, had overwhelmed them, making them vulnerable to the very arrogance that had led the angels to their fall. The intoxicating nectar of knowledge had turned to bitter poison in their veins. The paradox was clear. Knowledge didn't make them wiser but more destructive. At first, they wanted to be like the gods, but soon, they realized that they were no longer capable of distinguishing between divinity and corruption. The seed of war, sown in their hearts by the power they had obtained, grew without control. Humans were no longer content with learning from the world. They wanted to possess it, to dominate it, and in doing so, they destroyed everything that had been good within them. Azazel, upon seeing all of this, understood the inevitable. Humanity could never be what he had dreamed. The grand tapestry of creation, once vibrant with life and potential, was now being unraveled thread by their own hands. The sacrifice he had made by giving them knowledge hadn't been in vain, but it had also been a mistake, a heartbreaking error that echoed through the ages. What humans needed wasn't power but wisdom, and that wisdom couldn't come from themselves or from the fallen angels but from something deeper, beyond their comprehension. As the fallen angels faced their own judgment, they knew that heaven wouldn't forgive them. The sacrifice they made, the attempt to offer humanity an opportunity, hadn't only failed but had been perceived as a rebellion against the established order. The knowledge they had granted, which they thought would give them greatness, had only led them to damnation. They had traded their celestial inheritance for a handful of dust. Likewise, humans, rising with power that they didn't understand, faced an uncertain future. They could move forward, building a new civilization, but the question was whether they would be capable of avoiding falling again into the same errors as their creators. Would they heed the warnings whispered on the winds, or would they succumb to the allure of power once more? The ruins of ancient humanity, the burned villages and the crumbling empires were only a reminder of the price of knowledge, a stark monument to the consequences of unchecked ambition. It wasn't the war between the angels that hurt the most, nor the divine judgment that weighed the heaviest, but the possibility that humans, after all that they had learned, wouldn't be capable of finding peace. And in the end, even the fallen angels wondered if they would have been better off if they had never intervened, if they had simply let humans follow their natural path. But in the tragedy of their fall, perhaps there was some hope. The embers of compassion still flickered within their corrupted hearts. In their final sacrifice, in their struggle to save humanity, Azazel and the other fallen had taken a step toward redemption, albeit at the cost of their souls. In the grand cosmic balance, a debt had been paid, a price had been exacted. In the end, it wasn't about greatness or power but about recognizing the need to sacrifice for the good of others. Humans, now free from the direct influence of the angels, would have to learn for themselves the lessons that weren't given to them. And perhaps, only perhaps, in the future, they would find a path in which knowledge wouldn't be just a burden but a bridge toward something greater. The fall of the angels and the ascension of humanity is, after all, the story of creation itself, a perpetual cycle of ascents and falls, of knowledge and shadows. The true question, the one that still resonates in the echoes of history, is whether humans, upon learning from their own errors, could one day reach the wisdom that the fallen tried to offer them, or whether, in the end, humanity will only learn from its failures, just as the fallen angels did. A question that would linger in the air, a silent challenge to all who dared to dream of a better future. The world that emerged after the battle, after the fall of the angels and the dispersion of their remains. It wasn't a world in ruins, but neither was it one that had been freed from the darkness. Humans, now bearers of ancient knowledge, stood before an uncertain horizon, a path full of promises and dangers. The knowledge that had been given with the best of intentions had altered their deepest being. And although they now seemed masters of their destiny, their humanity was marked by the weight of that power. The sacrifice of Azazel and the other fallen had managed to seal the fate of those who had rebelled. But what had been left behind, the land that had been touched by the footprints of the Watchers, wasn't the same place. The very air crackled with the echoes of celestial conflict, and the land itself seemed to remember the touch of divine hands. The scars of the war, of the struggle for power and knowledge remained. Every corner of the world was a reminder of what had happened, and the echo of the decisions made resonated in the minds of humans, who now more than ever faced the great question: what to do with what they have learned? How to wield the power that had been thrust upon them. The first generations that lived after the sacrifice of the fallen tried to rebuild civilization, but in a way that was distinct from everything that had existed before. Although they didn't have the angels guiding them, humans tried to find in their own hearts the path that would lead them to redemption. However, upon being so accustomed to receiving, to following the guidelines of those who had once enlightened them, they found themselves lost. Knowledge hadn't only freed them but had also left them vulnerable. They were adrift in a sea of possibilities, without a compass or a guiding star. Without the proper control, humanity divided, as the darkest desires rose along with the light of wisdom. On one side, those who intended to use what they knew to rule, to establish new tyrannies under the pretext of enlightenment emerged. On the other, those who wished to live in harmony with the earth, who understood that knowledge wasn't a tool to be exploited but a responsibility that should be shared, used with humility. But humanity, like a newborn child that doesn't yet know how to walk, couldn't find a balance. They stumbled and fell, their hands reaching for power as a crutch. Knowledge, the power of creation, had blinded them. Meanwhile, from the darkest corners of the earth, the echoes of the fallen remained present. The sacrifice of Azazel wasn't the end of his story but a transformation. His soul, united to the darkness of his act, continued wandering among the human world, hoping that one day, humans would understand what he had done for them. The sacrifice of the Watchers hadn't been in vain, but humanity, in its pride, continued to not see the magnitude of the gift they had received. The weight of their sacrifice pressed upon the world, a silent plea for understanding and forgiveness. At first, humans didn't understand what that surrender meant. They thought that the fall of the angels was just a story, an ancient myth, a distant echo. They didn't understand that upon rejecting celestial guidance, upon seeking their own path without the wisdom to carry it, they were condemning themselves to the same decay that had accompanied them throughout history. The whispers of the fallen, once clear and distinct, were now muffled by the clamor of human ambition. But a dark truth began to filter into the hearts of some. Not all humans were capable of seeing beyond the surface of things. And those who did, who felt the heavy burden of that knowledge, understood that the future of humanity depended on a very delicate balance. If they wished to move forward, if they truly wished to build something that endured, they would have to learn to carry what had been given to them, not as a tool of power but as a responsibility. In the cities, the towers of marble and metal began to rise. The wise, who in their times were considered gods, were now the architects of the future. Humans, upon acquiring dominion over fire, metals, and the earth, began to mold the world in their image. But each advance, each step toward what seemed like grand achievements was marked by the shadow of violence and greed. The stain of ambition marred their creations, a constant reminder of the price of progress. The knowledge liberated from the hands of the angels no longer had the purity it had once possessed. It had become corrupted, and with it, the hearts of those who used it. Humans, despite their achievements, weren't closer to peace. Deep down, they knew that their destiny was at stake, that their arrogance and their desire for power wouldn't lead them anywhere, but no one seemed capable of stopping the march of progress, that uncontrollable impulse that led them toward the unknown, toward the forbidden. And in this internal conflict, the echoes of the fallen angels continued resonating, not as voices of condemnation but as whispers of warning. Had their celestial brethren been the true responsible ones? Or were humans, by their nature, incapable of withstanding such knowledge without succumbing to its shadows? Meanwhile, the humans who considered themselves the wisest, those who best understood the power of knowledge, began to organize into new orders, secret societies that followed the legacy of the fallen. They saw the future, not with fear but with ambition. They wanted to continue what the fallen angels had initiated, to transform man into something greater, something that could transcend even the limits of life itself. But in their attempt to replicate the sacrifice of the fallen, they were only recreating the cycle of arrogance that had brought the fall of the Watchers. The story seemed already to have begun to repeat itself. The angels, even after their fall, continued to influence the lives of humans in an unexpected way. The fallen hadn't faded away. Their essence remained present in the stars, in the winds, in the very air that humans breathed. The sacrifice of Azazel and the others hadn't been the end of their influence but the beginning of a new phase. They continued being part of the fabric of the world, in some way beyond human comprehension. But despite all of this, something continued to remain clear. Humanity couldn't be forced to learn from its errors. Each human being had to walk his own path, face his own shadows, his own decisions. Destiny wasn't written. Although humans received the gift of the Watchers, this gift came with a price. The freedom to choose between the light and the darkness. And as history had shown, that freedom doesn't always lead man down the right path. The story of the fallen angels, of their sacrifice and their fall, continues to resonate through the centuries. The sacrifice of those divine beings, their attempt to save humanity, isn't just a reminder of human fragility, but also a lesson about the true meaning of power. Because in the end, true knowledge isn't in what is known but in what is chosen to be done with it. Humanity, now with the power of the gods within reach of its hands, continues facing the same question that the fallen angels asked themselves. What to do with what we have learned? Will this be the moment in which they finally understand the weight of their wisdom, or will they continue like the Watchers seeking redemption, even at the cost of their own existence? Time, as always, will be the judge, the silent observer of their triumphs and their failures, the keeper of their secrets and their destinies.